When I was young, I'm not sure I had a film I loved more than The Wizard of Oz. It would turn up on television maybe once or twice a year, and watching it always seemed like a special event. And it got better and better with each viewing. Seeing Dorothy having her amazing adventures with her curious companions was the sort of thing of which childhoods should be made. I'd watched the film with my parents many times, but there are a few viewings of that film that really stand out for me. You see, I was a weird kid, and one thing I liked to do was read the TV guide on a Saturday, circling all the good stuff that was going to be on TV, and more importantly, on a channel we would get. Options were few. So when Wizard of Oz was coming up, I'd always know in advance, and I'd be prepared. But not always. I was close with my grandparents, both sets, and I visited them often. Trips down to Ottawa to stay with my gran, sometimes specifically to watch the excellent Saturday morning cartoons I would never get to otherwise see, were commonplace. But one time, Dad drove me down and I settled in with my gran and Gumpy for a quiet Friday night of watching TV together, and The Wizard of Oz came on. It was a complete surprise, and I had no idea to expect it. And getting to see my favorite film, while in one of my favorite places with some of my favorite people, made the experience really memorable. Especially since they seemed to like it as much as I did. The other time, we were in the United States. I'm not sure why. It was March break, so we were off school, and we were heading home, and we got caught in a blizzard. With road conditions rapidly deteriorating, my parents made the call to stop in a hotel or a motel or something in Rochester, New York to spend the night. We were all bummed out by this change to our plans, and we weren't really prepared for an impromptu hotel stay. And I remember crawling into bed, my hair still wet from the snow, and my dad turned on the TV, and The Wizard of Oz came on. It was just perfect timing, almost like, dare I say it, magic. And with a beloved film just there waiting for me, that hotel room night that shouldn't have been didn't seem so bad. It just became a nice night out with my parents, and a moment where I could lay another brick on the foundation of my love for old movies. Hello, film historians. I'm Derek, and I love old movies. We've got Sam the sidekick here.
Hello, and welcome to episode 38, where we will be concluding our month-long look at adventure films with a real doozy.
A Lulu, as it were.
As it were, sir.
That's because we are going to be discussing 1940's The Thief of Baghdad, starring Sabu, and directed by, well,
what?
Well, the directing of this film was a bit of a mess. It might be hard to actually say definitively who directed what. There are 3 credited directors on this film, and the possibility of 3 more uncredited.
What in the world?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mess. I'll be discussing that later.
Okay, I'm looking forward to hearing all that stuff.
All right, so let's get right down to business, and then we can move on with things.
So, business number 1. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Watching movies and talking about them for you is a lot of fun, and it's cool you're enjoying it.
Totally true. And you know what? We love hearing from you too, so if you've ever got ideas, suggestions, anything for us, maybe for films we should do, or aspects of films you'd like us to talk about, let us know.
Also, if you'd like to read a cold open for the podcast, maybe talking about a nostalgic or formative experience you had watching movies, get in touch, and let's make that happen right away.
You don't even have to be from a small town in the Ottawa Valley.
But bonus points if you did.
And if you could, please take a moment right now to hit like, subscribe, and share.
Especially share.
Yeah.
The sharing is the big one.
So big.
When you share, more people listen to our show. It's a fact.
Or if you are on an audio-only platform like Spotify or Google Podcasts, see about dropping us some stars, maybe a quick review.
You'd be surprised how much that sort of thing really helps.
And be sure to check us out, of course, on the socials.
I don't know if you knew this, but we are on the Facebook.
I Love Old Movies, the podcast.
You were probably wondering if we are on the Instagram. We are.
At I Love Old Movies, the podcast.
El Twitter? Oh yeah, we got you covered.
At ILOM podcast.
And the good old-fashioned email. You don't even need a stamp.
I love old movies, the podcast at gmail.com.
All one word.
And of course, you should also do what all the cool kids do, which is pet the rock. And by that, we mean head on over to petrockradio.ca to listen to amazing local web-based radio programming with fantastic music and previous episodes of our show broadcast 3 times a week.
Monday, Saturday, and Sunday.
That is as cool as it gets.
We'll link that for you in the description.
So, are you all set to travel back to ancient Basra and get all involved in the imbroglios there? The throne is in jeopardy, you know.
You bet. Let's hop on the magic carpet and get there pronto. Hit the music.
Our director, kind of, is Michael Powell. Powell got his start in the film industry in 1925 when he collaborated with director Rex Ingram to make Mare Nostrum in 1926 at Victorine Studios in France. He began doing various jobs such as sweeping, making coffee, writing titles for silent films, and eventually acting in small roles. After leaving France, he later partnered with producer Jerry Jackson in 1931. This was to make short films known as quota quickies that were required for a deal between America and Britain, and he sometimes made as many as 7 films a year. Despite not being his first directing role, Powell received his first screen credit as a director for The Two Crowded Hours in 1931. Over the next 5 years, he went on to direct another 23 films, including Red Ensign in 1934 and Phantom Light in 1935. Powell then met Emmerich Pressburger in 1939 while working on The Spy in Black, and they formed a partnership referred to as the Archers, where they worked as co-producers, writers, and directors. They made a total of 19 films together, several of which are seen as classics of 20th century cinema in Britain, including A Canterbury Tale from 1944. Powell's career started slowing down in the 1950s and 60s, and he only made 2 films in the 70s before retiring altogether. Powell died in 1990 at the age of 84.
The writer is Miles Malison. A large chunk of Malison's career was actually spent as an actor, starting with plays and eventually transitioning into film. He wrote his first play in 1913, D Company and Black L, and later wrote 2 documentaries, Land of Promise in 1946 and World of Plenty in 1943. Malison was most active with his writing career in the 30s and 40s, mostly focusing on historical topics, with films such as Nell Gwyn, 1934, Roads of Africa, 1936, and Victoria the Great in 1937. While Malison did earn 49 writing credits, he did continue to act in supporting roles throughout his career, earning 139 acting credits. He even appeared in a few Hammer horror films, such as Dracula in 1958 and The Hound of the Baskervilles in 1959. Failing eyesight forced him into retirement in the 60s, and Malison died in 1969 at the age of 80.
Born in India as the son of an elephant rider, Sabu was discovered by a British film crew in the 1930s and cast in Elephant Boy at the age of 13. That film was intended as a documentary, but the film The Drum was an immediate commission as a project for the young performer. Working mostly in British films in the early part of his career, Sabu soon appeared in film versions of The Thief of Baghdad, Arabian Nights, and The Jungle Book. He made a 3-pack of films for Universal in the early 1940s before gaining American citizenship and joining the Air Force, serving as a tail gunner on a bomber crew. After the war, starring roles, even prominent roles, were harder to come by. He turned up in smaller films, B-films, in stereotypical roles. Movies like Man-Eater of Cimarron, Savage Drums, and Hello, Elephant. He returned to Europe in the 1950s looking for better opportunities, and he did make a small series of films playing a fictionalized version of himself, Sabu the Jungle Boy. He even tried to get a permit to work in films in his native country, but he was unable to do that. Sabu's life was not without controversy, having some legal issues in the 1950s due to a paternity suit and a potential insurance scam involving arson and the burning of his home. You know, regular failed movie star stuff. Never again achieving the heights he reached so quickly as a young international performer, Sabu died from a heart attack in 1963. He was only 39 years old.
The son of an Argentinian rancher and a licensed pilot by the age of 12, John Justin took a fairly straightforward pathway into the film industry. He trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art and then joined up with Sir John Gielgud's repertory company. He auditioned for The Thief of Baghdad, got the role, and a 7-year contract with Alexander Korda to go with it. His role as Prince Ahmed was probably the high point of his screen career, in all fairness, and his far more impressive and acclaimed bits of performance were on stage as opposed to screen. He found time to perform in many Shakespearean productions, as well as make some films all across Europe, usually as a leading man. In the late 50s, he joined the Old Vic Company, and by 1960, he made his Broadway debut, effectively ending his film career, except for a few roles in smaller films in the 1970s and enough television work to pay the bills. Justin was quite ambivalent about his film career, calling it a mistake. His love was for the stage, and that's where his best work happened. He retired from the screen in 1983, sticking to occasional stage work until his death in 2002 at the age of 85.
The 1924 silent film version of The Thief of Baghdad, directed by Raoul Walsh and starring Douglas Fairbanks, was not an easy act to follow for filmmakers. Considered one of the greatest films of the silent era, as well as Fairbanks' best work, this movie had an unassailable reputation. But in the late 1930s, Alexander Korda's production company, London Films, started work on a British film industry remake, and to say it was an ambitious undertaking is no understatement. A film that thrives on its visual splendor and special effects, even being the first film to use a blue screen technique. This film won Oscars to confirm its outstanding achievements.
It is a very cool-looking film. Like, from the moment it begins, the wow factor is kind of high.
But all of this came at the cost of a very chaotic production.
Oh, do tell.
So, Korda was very particular about getting the right director and the right composer for the job at hand, and he hired Ludwig Berger. But he became so disappointed in Berger's work and vision, which was a little less grand in scope and scale, that he was feeling a change would be necessary. Berger's real crime in Korda's mind, though, was his choice of composer, who was producing music that Korda was not going to use.
So he fired Berger, right? And hired another director?
Well, yes and no. He did hire another director, Michael Powell, but he didn't exactly tell Berger this.
Wait, what? Seriously?
Yeah. So Berger thinks he's directing the film, and Powell keeps coming in on the sly to reshoot scenes. And eventually, his work on the film was greatly outweighing Berger's. And to further undermine Berger, Korda hired his own composer, Miklos Rozsa, to work on a score as per Korda's intentions, and he even gave Rozsa an office right next to Berger's.
Okay, sounds a bit chaotic. A bit toxic, even.
Just enough to notice. Eventually, Berger left the production.
Way to get the hint there, Ludwig. That must have made Korda happy at last, though.
Well, you'd think. The problem was that by then World War II was breaking out, and Powell had to leave the project as well to go work on films for the War Department.
So they went from having 2 directors to having none?
Yes.
Oh.
But it's okay.
They hired a third?
They sure did. Tim Whalen, an American who had worked with Korda before and was brought in to finish the film. But then, with the production almost bankrupt, Korda moved the whole thing to Hollywood to finish. In fact, almost all the scenes with Sabu had to be reshot because he had grown 3 inches over the length of the shooting schedule. And since Powell was gone and Whalen wasn't available, Korda, his brother Zoltan, and William Menzies all oversaw shooting of various scenes.
So wait. This movie had 6 directors?
Yeah, more is better, right?
I mean, I guess? Okay. Tell me about the songs. What is up with those songs? They seem so out of place.
Right. You mean those 3 sort of musical numbers. Well, that's easily explained. Korda envisioned the film as a musical, so songs were written for it. The idea of making it a musical, though, sort of faded away during production, and the rest of the numbers were scrapped.
They just decided halfway through that it wasn't going to be a musical?
Right.
Wow. Okay, how did this film go over?
So, audiences in the US and Europe loved it, and it was one of the top box office draws of its release year. The visuals, the colors, and the special effects absolutely wowed audiences. Roger Ebert held the film in particularly high regard, putting it on a level with The Wizard of Oz. Now, while I'm not sure I can totally agree with that, there is no denying the influence of this film, and aspects of it can be seen in many subsequent movies, perhaps most notably Disney's Aladdin, made 50 years later. What's the tail of the tape on this one, Sam?
Okay, so we have a 7.4 on IMDb. The audience score is 81% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the tomato meter is 100%. The film won 3 Oscars for Best Art Direction, Cinematography, and Special Effects. The film can also be watched on Tubi.
In ancient Basra, we meet a blind beggar who has an exceptionally well-trained dog. It turns out that he's not an ordinary beggar. No. He is, in fact, Ahmed, the Sultan of Baghdad.
Well, how did he wind up in a harem hanging out with harem girls?
He explains that as the Sultan, he wanted to learn more about his people so that he could better rule in their best interests. His Grand Vizier, Jafar, suggested to him that he dress as a commoner and mingle among the regular folk, soaking up some slice-of-life perspective.
But Jafar is evil.
Yeah, obviously. He's played by Conrad Veidt, so he's automatically the bad guy.
And the whole plan has been a trick. The trick being, get Ahmed into pauper's clothing and have him arrested and thrown in a dungeon to have his head chopped off.
That's a good trick.
While in his nasty cell, Ahmed meets Abu, a young thief. Abu springs them out of the jail, they steal a boat, and head to Basra. And when in Basra, Ahmed meets the princess of the toy-loving Sultan there. And they fall in love.
Like, instantly.
Like, even for a movie, the love hits fast here. It's like, hello. Hello. Well, we're in love now. Yes, we are.
Complicating all of this is that Jafar has headed to Basra as well, intent on making the princess love him. Probably using magic to make that happen, but...
So Jafar presents the Sultan with a mechanical flying horse, and the Sultan grants Jafar the princess in marriage. But the princess loves Ahmed, so she books it. But in anger, Jafar casts spells that blind Ahmed and turn Abu into a dog.
This is all still the flashback, by the way.
The princess is brought back to Jafar, but falls into some kind of magical sleep, but cannot be awakened. Blind Ahmed is brought in to break the spell.
True love always breaks sleeping spells.
But once the princess is back awake, Ahmed is dumped on the docks with his dog.
On board a sailing ship, the princess is told by Jafar that if she makes with the lovey-dovey, he will break the spell on Ahmed and Abu. She does, and he does, but this leads to a boat chase, as Ahmed wants to get the princess back.
Jafar summons a storm that shipwrecks Ahmed and Abu, and then returns to Basra using an enchanted mechanical dancing robot sort of thing to kill the Sultan, freeing him to take the princess back to Baghdad.
Shipwrecked on the beach, Abu finds a bottle on the shore and opens it, releasing a huge and powerful genie that he is able to wrangle 3 wishes out of. The first wish is a bit of a bust, but the genie helps Abu acquire a magic seeing stone that he uses to find Ahmed. The second wish brings the friends back together, but when Ahmed uses the stone and sees the princess being ensorcelled by Jafar to forget her love for him, Ahmed loses it. Abu uses the last wish to send Ahmed back to Baghdad.
Abu watches in the jewel while Ahmed storms the palace in just a terrible fight scene. He gets captured and he and the princess are thrown in a cell to await execution. Abu destroys the jewel in frustration.
Oh, that's bad.
But smashing the jewel unlocks other magic, including some old king from the land of legend.
That's good.
Sure is. Abu gets a magic crossbow and a magic carpet and heads off to Baghdad to save Ahmed.
Abu arrives in time to interrupt the beheading, and he fires his crossbow hither and yon, killing a lot of bad guys, including Jafar. And to make things better, his arrival seems to align with some kind of prophecy, and this inspires the common folk to rise up against Jafar's men.
Ahmed gets to be Sultan again, he's going to marry the princess and unite Baghdad and Basra, and plans on educating Abu so he can grow up to become the new vizier.
But Abu hates the sound of that, and he nopes out of there on his magic carpet, heading off to look for adventure.
You know, when we describe it like that, it sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
Thrilling, even. Maybe a bit silly, but in the good way.
It didn't feel like that when we watched it, though.
No, it did not. It felt a lot more labored and slow and cliched and really long.
I think our pros and cons will be very interesting.
Let's find out.
Okay, so as always, we don't actually rate films here on the show. There are no stars, there are no thumbs. We just tell you some things we liked.
Some things we didn't.
And then we recommend whether or not you might enjoy giving this one a watch.
Take it away.
My pros. Number 1, the colors. Wow, this is a visually vibrant film. A constant whirling kaleidoscope of colors and shapes and angles, all made real in costumes and sets and matte paintings. It's a complete feast for the eyes. Even when the story drags and the characters bore, there's so much to look at that is all so beautiful, you won't even notice. This is a perfect example of a film that might be as good with the sound off as on. Number 2, further to that, the visual effects for this film are so far ahead of their time, it is ridiculous. From the flying toy horse, to the genie, to the model work with the boats, to the storm, to the magic carpet, this film is incredible in its ability to bring magic to life. It must have absolutely thrilled audiences to see what this film had to offer. Number 3, it might sound like a weird pro for what is ultimately a children's film, family film sort of thing, but the level of violence that is shown is pretty intense and visceral, and that makes some scenes just the right amount of more intense. Whether it is a threat to dismember Abu bit by bit, or swords slashing faces, or arrows plunging into chests and heads, if you like a wee bit of gore with your storybook fantasy, this film has got your back. My cons. Number 1, there's an awful lot of actors in brownface in this film. So all the points garnered for casting Sabu are squandered by putting all the other leads in heavy makeup and having them pretend to be something they are not. Conrad Veidt's casting is probably the most curious. While no stranger to playing the sneering villain, simply inserting his heavy German accent into a Middle Eastern vizier just seems like an example of putting the actor ahead of the role. We aren't fans of whitewashed casting here at ILOM, and although we recognize that it existed as a matter of practice during its era, being able to understand it doesn't make us able to accept it. 2, while it is arguably a visually lush film, the setup is incredibly wordy and slow. Once Abu and Ahmed are off having their adventures, things pick up. But for something marketed as a family film, a children's film even, the storytelling style isn't especially conducive to a young audience. Things just kind of happen in the film without much effective flow between scenes. I wonder if this could be a result of the multiple directors, with no doubt conflicting visions, all working on this film. And for a film that starts so slowly, the ending couldn't seem more rushed. Number 3, the songs. Really, for all the hand-wringing and consternation over the composer choice by Alexander Korda, the songs featured in this film are dreadful. They're all too serious, too overblown, and without the slightest degree of catchiness. This film is much better for the abandoning of the idea of it being a musical, but the songs that remained should have been purged, especially the horrible ones sung by the princess in her garden. But then again, the only thing worse than the songs in this movie are the fight scenes. So maybe I should have picked that. Although it is kind of hard to split hairs when you get such a satisfying and definitive conclusion to a villain's reign of terror as this film offers. One magic crossbow bolt right between the eyes. It's not climactic, it's not even tension-filled. It just happens. In all, though, the visual effects alone, demonstrating not only the imagination but the capabilities of the filmmakers of this era, give this film a pass. It's a long, surprisingly dull watch, but it deserves a watch all the same for the special and influential place it holds in film history. You're up.
All right. My pros. 1. Abu. He was absolutely my favorite character, hands down. He was probably the most entertaining part of the entire plot. He's just trying to live his life and have a good time, minus the whole being in a dungeon part, and yet he keeps getting dragged into all of Ahmed's messes. Poor Abu literally gets turned into a dog because he was trying to be a good friend and stand up for Ahmed. Despite the film totally focusing on Ahmed the entire time, he never would have gotten back to the princess if it wasn't for Abu accidentally using his last wish on him. Plus, Abu swooped in on the flying carpet to save the princess and Ahmed at the end. So technically, Abu is the true hero of the story. 2. The sets. They were really nice. They were so big and full and pretty, it was almost like looking at a painting in some scenes. And the colors in this movie were so bright and vibrant, they really brought everything to life. It was like walking into a rainbow or something. There was just so much to look at. This was a very aesthetically pleasing film to watch. 3. The effects. They were so good. Honestly, there were parts where I would just stop everything I was doing to sit and watch the effects happening in the scene. The horse running in the sky, the flying carpet, and the giant genie were all amazing. It's almost unbelievable to think that they were able to do all of that in 1940. They were crazy impressive and just incredible to watch. Now my cons. 1. The singing. Why? Why was this here? I understand that at one point it was going to be a musical, but they scrapped that idea. Therefore, they should have scrapped the singing parts. They were so out of place and completely took me out of the scene. They didn't fit with the story or the characters, and they were just unnecessary in general. 2. Ahmed and the princess. What even is this relationship? Is this a relationship? I don't think it can really be called that, since they only talk to each other like 3 times in the entire film. I guess that they were going for the whole love at first sight thing, but it came off as pretty weird. Like, I know that I comment on relationships like this being too fast a lot in my cons section, but this was ridiculous. Ahmed saw the princess once and became obsessed with her. She saw him after he sneaked into her little private forest area and was like, yeah, that's cool. Well, guess I'm in love now. And that was the first time they ever met. The whole thing was just too forced and unbelievable. 3. The runtime. This film was way too long. That's all there is to it. If the film was more interesting, then they could have gotten away with it. But honestly, at some points, I was really struggling to stay focused. It was just so dull and boring. I could barely pay attention. The film was just not entertaining enough to be so long. It's crazy to think that this was meant to be a kids' movie. If I could barely sit through an hour and 46 minutes of this, there's no way a kid could have.
And is this a watch for you?
Well, I mean, I can't think of a better way to say this, but this film is a workout to get through, and not for good reasons. There were parts I really liked, but they were just that. Parts. Aspects. As a film overall, I just didn't find it enjoyable. This is a don't watch for me. I'm a bit on the fence about recommending it, since I know that I would never watch this again. Maybe watch it for the effects? I don't know. Bah, don't watch. Final answer.
Holy crap. Has this ever happened? I feel like we don't disagree on films too much, and it's not like I disagree with you here. I'm basically recommending watching for the effects.
And I'm saying the best special effects don't make up for boring movies. And you know as well as I do, that's a well-proven Hollywood fact.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that.
Point for the Sam.
All right. And with that comes the end of another episode.
How did you like it? Is this your idea of a fun fantasy movie for the whole family? Or is there one you like better? Let us know all about it in the comments.
And be sure to come back next week, as we will be stepping away from the adventure films of April and moving into May with a month-long look at animation, starting with the Disney classic Snow White and the Seven Dwarves.
The first full-length animated feature for those keeping score at home. This is going to be a good one.
I remember seeing this in a theater during a reissue special feature thing when I was a bit younger than you. It made an impression. And when you were young, we bought you a copy when it became available.
I honestly don't even remember. This is the Hi-Ho movie, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay then. Can't wait. But until then, be sure to watch more movies.
And let everyone know about us. We're not a secret, and you do not have to keep us all to yourselves.
So tell your friends.
Tell your enemies.
You never know. They might like shooting overpowered magic users in the head with a crossbow as much as you do.
Maybe even more. For Sam the Sidekick, I'm Derek, and I love old movies. Additional research for I Love Old Movies, the podcast, is done by Nikki Weatherden. Audio clips come from freefx.co.uk. Images are used through the provisions of fair use, and our theme song, Burning Bridges, is by The Crocs.